I mean, ultimately, with all of my scientific background, and we could do an hour deep dive on the scientific reasons why astrology works, leaning on low frequency electromagnetic waves, quantum physics, non-locality. I mean, I know all the buzzwords, all the scientific background of why, with the advent of quantum physics, astrology is absolutely embraceable by the most current scientific thought. But when push comes to shove, I do know why astrology works. It's magic.
And
It's magic.
magic.
Welcome to the I Don't Believe in Astrology podcast. The podcast is dedicated to conscious souls looking to change the world. Astrologer by day, climate activist by night. Here is your host, Debra Silverman.
I don't know, when I saw your chart and saw all those planets in Aries, I got so excited.
Yeah, it's been said that I carry over the legal limit of planets in Aries.
Have you ever gotten a ticket?
Not yet. It's because I speed away and I have Gemini rising and I talked my way out of it.
I love that. So welcome to Debra Silverman. This is a very unusual podcast. It's not the ordinary. It's called I Don't Believe in Astrology, and we can't even use those words, the two of us. So this is a interview with Debra Silverman and Rick Levine as two astrologers. And I, unlike all the other, of course, you're so unique, all the other podcasts, I've done research, deep research on astrology before I met you.
I'm sure you have.
And you started in 1976?
Well, that's when I first charged for a chart. I began studying astrology probably about 67, 68. I was a freshman in college. I had read a few books before then, but it was really in my college years that I really began doing a deeper dive in astrology. And I have to say, though, before we get officially started, even though I know we're officially started, that I've often said to people, I don't believe in astrology, because when someone says to me, I don't believe in astrology, my stock answer is, cool, I don't believe in the astrology that you don't believe in.
Exactly. I love that, Gemini rising. I feel the same way. And I love your line about astrology has bad PR.
Well,
What do you
it's
what do you
it's
mean
true.
by that?
Well, it's because most people don't understand what astrology is, because it's really the only subject out there that organized religion and organized science, which may be a religion in itself, agree upon. And that is that both science and religion agree that astrology is a wart on humanity and needs to be cut off and gotten rid of, And so, from that standpoint, astrology has a bit of a PR problem, because between academic modern science and religion, they control a lot of people's thoughts.
What was it that originally destroyed their appetite for this? What was it that made it a wart?
Oh, well, two separate things. For religion, when we're talking about the Judeo-Christian tradition, we have to understand that nothing in Judaism or in Christianity disbelieves in astrology or says it doesn't work. It just says don't do it. And in fact, I mean, even I don't know if you know this, but Jews all over the world say, for good luck, they say Mazel Tov, which most people think means good luck. It actually means may the stars be with you. That's what its original meaning is. It's the goodness of the natural order of the stars coming through. And when you go back in tradition, there's no separation between astrology and religion. Look, if 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 astrology is so bad, why did Jesus only invite 3 non-family members to his birth? And they were magi. Magi were Zoroastrian priests. They were astrologers, sometimes called astrologer priests. So there's nothing in Catholicism that says astrology doesn't work. Even someone like Thomas of Aquinas, actually practiced astrology until he realized that politically you couldn't have people believing in the astrologer at the edge of town and the church maintain its political structure. It was in I think the late 1700s, maybe early 1800s, that the Danish theologian Soren Kierkegaard wrote about the difference between Christianity and Christendom. Christianity, the teachings of Jesus, and Christendom, the political institution of the church, and how different they were. And so, I mean, the Vatican has one of the largest libraries in astrology libraries in the world. And as you may know, Rob Hand, who may be one of the bright minds of astrology, on the planet in the 20th and early 21st century, he went back to college in his 60s to get a PhD in ancient history. And he did that from Catholic University that flies 3 flags: the flag of the United States, the flag of West Virginia, and the flag of the Vatican. They're under the direct auspices of the Pope. And the priests there welcomed him, knowing his contributions to astrology, and because they said, we need more people like you doing work like this. And Rob's doctoral thesis was on the church's use of astrology in medieval warfare. So the church doesn't disbelieve in astrology. They just don't want you to do it because they want you to go to the priest. Now, that's a totally separate issue than science, that basically doesn't want you to believe in astrology because modern science is built on the myth of repeatability. If something is scientific, it has to be repeatable. And in fact, Deepak Chopra once quipped that modern science suffers from its belief in the medieval superstition of materialism. And so there's this idea that science can't accept astrology because astrology is based upon the concept that every moment in time is unique. And therefore, even though, like Galileo dropped these objects from the Leaning Tower of Pisa and came up with the formula that works any time of day, any time of year, from any place on the planet, that an object dropped will accelerate at 32 feet per second every second, 32 feet per second per second. And it doesn't matter what time it is. And so what happened was that through what we call the Enlightenment, we began to exclude the idea of time as kairos, which is one way that the Greeks measured time. We established Chronos, Saturn, as the mechanical, I call it Newton's clock, tick, tock. Every second is the same length, no matter what happens. Whereas in Kairos, every second is different depending upon what happens in that moment, because there's a quality of time that the Chinese understood, like, for example, in the I Ching, the Book of Changes, that in modern Western society, we've lost because of Newton's illusion that the three-dimensional world of tick-tock, cause and effect is really the rules of the universe, and it's not. See, I don't even think you asked a question yet, and there I go. Anyhow, that's.
I don't mind. I'm having the best time. So one of my questions, because I am in love with Saturn, and everyone that knows me knows Saturn's my best friend, and I am a worshiper of time. I'm one of those people that is always on time, and yet there is no such thing as time, or so they say. I'm so confused by these things. As an astrologer, I'd love to hear your take on that. What is time?
Well, there is such a thing as time. Time is an illusion, and an illusion is not untrue. We'll come back to that in just a moment. This is a fallacy. People say, oh, it's just an illusion. No, an illusion is something that exists metaphysically and has yet to materialize physically. And in fact, it's our friend Saturn that is the gateway between illusion and the three-dimensional world in which we live.
Okay,
But
can I ask a question? Wait, before I interrupt this, don't forget your thought.
anytime.
So, I'm so curious, Neptune and Saturn coming together.
Well, that's where I was going. So yes,
I'm telling you. Okay, keep going. I'm all ears.
So the thing about time, Albert Einstein once said, time is an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. Now, time is an illusion that's created by the movement of something around a center. That's what creates time. Whether it's the moon going around the earth or the earth going around the sun, or an electron going around a nucleus of an atom, or whether it's the earth spinning on its axis looking like the sun is going around, when there's anything that is moving in a circle around a center, which is the circumpunct, the symbol of the sun, a circle with a dot in the middle, that is where time originates. The problem with time is that we forget that we live in a chronocentric universe. I mean, look, we live on a little dust mote, going around in kind of an unimportant sun or star on the outer rim of a relatively small galaxy, and our sun is one of trillions of stars. Our galaxy, all containing galaxies containing hundreds of billions of stars. There are billions of galaxies that we can see, and yet we say the universe is 18 billion years old, as if the universe measures its time by this little insignificant planet going around an insignificant star in just another galaxy in the cosmos. I mean, time is an illusion, but it's the illusion in which we live that creates the physical world of cause and effect, that gives us the illusion of past, present, and future. And I mean, modern physics is now dealing with a whole new branch of physics called retrocausality. And this is not like a theoretical branch of physics. This is an experimental branch of physics that is looking at how the future impacts the present moment, or how the present moment impacts the past. Deal with that one. That's another deep dive, not for now, but this is real stuff. So when it comes to Saturn and Neptune, here's the deal. And actually, we have to bring Jupiter into the equation, because Jupiter's job is expansion, right? Jupiter is like the cosmic magnifying lens. Wherever Jupiter is, things become bigger, more important. It's opportunity because we see things that aren't there yet, and it's the potential. Jupiter is gaseous, it's the biggest planet, and it's like blowing up a balloon. And as you blow up a balloon, it gets bigger, and that's what Jupiter is. In fact, a lot of the to words like joy and baby and bouncy and bountiful and belly and all these good words, gas, explosion, all these words are all sounding like Jupiter because we speak astrology all the time. The problem with Jupiter, or not the problem, the limitation of Jupiter, is that the balloon can only be blown up as far as the limits of Saturn allow it. Jupiter always has to answer to Saturn, because Saturn is the containment of the three-dimensional world. It's the gateway between here and there. And of course, until Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and a gazillion other things were discovered, we had no way of comprehending there. We just knew something was there.
The Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's happening in 2025, I'm bringing you back.
Okay, well, this is where we're going. This is exactly where we're going, because Neptune is Jupiter that's escaped from the confines of Saturn. Neptune's Jupiter in drag. That's all it is. Neptune is basically Jupiter that doesn't have to logically answer to Saturn's requirement to make it logical, make it philosophical, state your opinion, rationalize your judgment. This is what Jupiter's job is. But Neptune says, bullshit, that ain't home. I can go anywhere and I don't have to rationalize anything. But here's the magic. You see, when Neptune was discovered, it was thought to be the worst possible thing ever. You know, you go back and you read the stuff, from the late 1800s after Neptune was discovered. Neptune was the planet of deception, psychosis. It was delusion. It was mental
It's
illness. It
when
was
cameras came into play. It's when stories and media. Okay, so help me.
no, wait, hang on one second, because where we're going with this is that all of these things were all outside of the realm of the cause and effect three-dimensional world. And so they were considered to be crazy until we did the deep dive of the Neptune-Pluto conjunction in the 1890s that created the opening of theosophy and depth psychology, Freud's interpretation of dreams, and Jung, and that whole deep dive into the worlds beyond Saturn that existed within us. And so what we now know, and I love this quote, Rob Hand wrote many years ago, he wrote that astrology taught that Saturn was reality and Neptune illusion, whereas now we've come to realize that Neptune is reality and Saturn is the illusion there was one.
That's why I think in June 2025, and for the people listening that don't know what we're talking about, Neptune is the planet that rules altered states, other worlds. And it's been very prevalent because we've had ayahuasca and microdosing and mushrooms, and people have let themselves slide out to that world. And in June of this year, for the first time in 100 years, I want to say, Saturn and Neptune have come together in June, Saturn being at 0 degrees Aries and Neptune. And that's what I wanted to say. So translate that for me in your translation of how that will show up.
Exactly. Well, actually, Saturn and Neptune come together about every 45 years.
Oh,
However,
first time Aries.
however, they only come together at the point of 0 degrees Aries, which is the starting point of all Western astrology. And in many branches of astrology, that 0 degrees of Aries that's set every year at the vernal equinox, that actually is a mappable point on a chart. And so that Saturn and Neptune conjunction that comes almost exact this summer in 2025, within minutes of arc, but doesn't become exact until a year from now, next February. But I've gone back about 3,500 years, and there's never been a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries. And on top of that, it's not just Saturn and Neptune, it's doing it at a time when Uranus changing signs is making a harmonious trine with Pluto, and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is right in the middle. So we're getting a pattern that, I mean, astrologers like to say this happened the last time 150 years ago or 200. This one's, I've never seen it happen, and so we don't know what it's going to be. But back to what it means is that Saturn and Neptune, Saturn is what we think of as the three-dimensional world of reality, and Neptune, as you said, is imagination and dreams, and which is illusion, is just it's the psyche imagining something. That's what an illusion is. In fact, an illusion in Freudian and Jungian psychology is not incorrect, and it's not something that's untrue. It's something based on wish fulfillment. And of course, as Walt Disney taught us, a dream is a wish your heart makes, and dreams do come true. And so this is Saturn's job. Saturn's job is to make the illusion or the dreams or the imagination of Neptune precipitate from other dimensions into the three-dimensional world. In fact, I like to say that Neptune's job is to create a meta meaning beyond, metaphysical framework upon which, almost like a scaffolding, upon which Saturn crystallizes reality. That's Neptune's job. Caroline Casey says it brilliantly. She says imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. And so this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, in some ways, can be very difficult for those people who have a lot invested in the three-dimensional world, because the limits of the three-dimensional world sometimes drop out, which can be very disillusioning, discouraging. Oh, and the word disillusionment is one of the most misunderstood words ever, because an illusion is the dream. when a dream precipitates into Saturnian three-dimensional reality and it becomes real, it's often not quite as pretty, maybe unless we're on mescaline or ayahuasca or some sort of fire-breathing pranayama, something that is activating these altered states of consciousness. Often the three-dimensional reality is not as pretty as the illusion or the dream was. And so we become what? We become disillusioned. Disillusionment is fantastic because it means we're in the real world. And yes, often what that means is then people come discouraged. That's a different thing, because discouragement is not healthy, because when we look out at the three-dimensional world and we see what's real, and we can become so disillusioned because our dreams have crashed into some altered reality that's not ours, we become very discouraged. And once we're discouraged, you know, the courage that comes from the front, that's of the heart. And when we lose heart, then we're in trouble. We have to become disillusioned and still encouraged. That is the paradox of this time. So this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is going to be a real gateway, but it also can be a real awakening and opening for those people who think the three-dimensional world is all there is.
I think Saturn and Neptune the last 2 years, and also you know about the telepathy tapes, I'm sure you
Oh,
do.
yeah. Yeah.
It went wild in the honor of Saturn and Neptune coming together, and Saturn being in Pisces, that we're beginning to realize this reality that we're so attached to is being proven to us, that there's so much more here than what the eye sees. And finally, the materialistic world doesn't have us by the short and curly. It's like we're being able to open our minds to knowing the truth, which is reality is not what you think it is. Nothing's what it appears. And this is merely a dream. Welcome to Neptune, opposite your sun, your moon, your Mercury.
Well, you know, we're coming from a world where in the computer world, the biggest breakthrough in the early 80s, what computer scientists called WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, WYSIWYG. And it was a big deal to be able to see something on a screen and print it out rather than having a page full of crazy characters. We live in a world that we thought, in the Isaac Newton paradigm in the mechanical physics, we lived in a WYSIWYG world. What we saw was what we thought we were getting.
That's the
Quantum physics has shown us that what we saw was just the surface of the ocean. Scientists now know that we can perceive about 4% of what's out there. They call like 96% of what's out there dark matter or dark energy.
Yes.
And so the world is a WYSIWYG. What you see is not what you get.
So as a therapist who works with the human psyche, as an astrologer that specializes in this, the human response to that truth, to Neptune disillusioning, to use your word, or to dissolving this contract that we believed what we saw was truth, this is a very disconcerting, it dysregulates the nervous system, makes us feel scared. So I'm just curious what you see when it comes to the human condition over time. Like, clearly we're leaving an entire era behind. All the outer, I haven't told people this yet, but in my circle, obviously all the astrologers are talking about it. All the outer planets in 2025 throughout is going into fire and air. So Pluto's going into Aquarius, and Neptune's going into Aries, and Saturn's going into Aries, and Uranus is going into Gemini. So there's this very wild combustive energy about to arrive.
And then we have Jupiter in a year and a half going into Leo, kind of completing the whole thing. So yes, fire, and we're moving from, you see, most people don't understand that the water and earth signs are feminine, and I don't mean that sexually. I mean that yin. And Plato called that soul. The energy comes down and in. That's soul, and that's down and inward. That's left hand, right brain. Meanwhile, fire and air is ascending rather than descending. That's spirit. And all the planets are moving from this inward to this yang outward manifestation of fire and air. So yes, what you're saying is absolutely true.
And what's contributing to the fear factor that's in the zeitgeist right now, that, oh my God, everything's changing. Oh my God, AI is coming to get us. Oh my God, climate change is coming to get us. What is your point of view about this futuristic implication? Because there's such a collective thought to be terrified white gripping it because the nervous system can't stand change. And then the other people going, woohoo, let's let go. I'm curious what your point of view is on climate and on the future.
Well, two things. First of all, this change that is absolutely at an inflection point now really began in the 1890s, early 1900s with the introduction of psychoanalysis and other forms of depth psychology. That's where we began to knock, as D.H. Lawrence wrote, where we knocked the center out of the universe, and we're now buzzing bees rather than drunkenly going around the sun, in a regular pattern. This was after a conversation that he actually had with Albert Einstein, and he wrote this incredible thing about relativity. Anyhow,
I think that's Pluto entering for the first time our visible ability to see it in 1930. That was the entrance of the going into the dark and saying, okay, I acknowledge there's an invisible world.
Well, again, I think it really began with the discovery of Uranus and Pluto's moving into Aquarius the last time around, because then we were discovering electricity. That was also invisible. And then when Neptune was being discovered, we had this whole delving into the electromagnetic spectrum. So it's not, and yes, with the discovery of Pluto, the whole psychoanalytic and psychodynamic, the analytical psychology.
Unconscious mind. We never had a word for the unconscious mind.
Never had a word for the unconscious. People don't get that. People just don't understand that there was no word for projection.
That's why it was embarrassing for any of our family to go to psychology. That was all a no-no, and no one knew what we were talking about. Just notice, stop for a moment and notice the evolution. You are like a time traveler in the 11th house. And you speed. Woo, woo. I've got Mercury and Taurus. So I just want to take a minute. Let's just back up. There's this transition that's occurring on the planet. Yes, love that. Take a deep breath. There's this transition happening on the planet. There's these outer planets moving out. There's this incredible increase of fear in the zeitgeist that I know everyone's watching this is experiencing it. Is it good? Is it bad? We have this constant conversation about climate. There's not a question about our politics. I'm going to ask the question again. Are you an optimist, pessimist? How do you see the future? I'm so curious.
I'm a possibilist. But I'll tell you this, in psychodynamic, in all forms of psychodynamic psychology, under pressure, under fear, there's something that occurs. And Freud called that infantile regression. Basically, when the going gets tough, we go back into the illusion that the past was better.
Yes.
That's what happens in that the ego in its protection, in its system of defense. And again, we live in a culture now where everyone goes, "Oh, ego is bad." No, ego is what we need for survival. I mean, you and I may energetically be part of the same thing that everyone is part of. That's the Piscean world of everything is contained within everything. We're all just pearls on Indra's net. But the fact of the matter is that when the ego gets threatened in any way, it pulls in, it Saturnizes, it contracts, and it goes back to someplace in the psyche where it thought it was safe. Like when it was a child and everything was taken care of, whether or not it was, the illusion is that was safe. And that's why we have this whole, it's so classic, make America great again, as if it was great. When we were a kid, so to speak. It's a psychodynamic state of infantile regression because people are rightfully scared, not just because of the astrology that's going on, not just because of the political dynamics, but because of this technological place we've never been, where we've been for a few centuries since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, making changes and accelerating, and we've hit a point on the curve that some people call, well, Terence McKenna and Dennis McKenna called it time wave zero. It's that moment of where the curve hits that asymptote, where it goes straight up. And people are scared. And yes, there are people who want to say, just jump into it, do more LSD or do more meditation, or, let's just go into the future. And then there are people who are saying, no, this is frightening. I want all the boundaries I can have. I want to go back to the way it was. And quite frankly, Jupiter, Saturn, And Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto all exist. And if we're going to make it into the future, we have to find ways for all of them to express, not just one or another.
That's so beautiful. Let's take a breath. In order for this to exist, we have to have an expanded awareness that doesn't feel safe based on one or the other. It's an and. And once the mind has the capacity, this is so much what I work with. I am a primitive, old-fashioned astrologer that works with the elements. My whole conversation is water, air, earth, and fire. And my belief is that I have a very strong connection with the Mayan, and the connection with the body being the resource to be able to continually take the nervous system into a breath, into a calm, all the while expanding and keeping our attention on this wonderful global, magical, astrological. I mean, listening to you talk tickles me because I feel like we really are in like a rocket ship going backwards and forwards. And yet, in this here and now, it's so relevant that you and I are sitting together as two astrologers, encouraging all of our listeners who are listening to this. It's safe. This is predicted. It's obvious. It's been going on the whole time. It's just that our awarenesses are coming on. We're reaching levels of evolution for the first time, as we always will, with the invent of computers making astrology a button. I mean, that has to be a really relevant factor.
So you and I are here and now. You and I, right now, we are here. Where the fuck is here? You know, I mean, when you're in a Zoom meeting with someone in Adelaide, someone in, you know, in Cape Town,
Hawaii.
someone in Moscow, and someone in London, and someone in San Francisco, then you go, we're all here. I mean, 100 years ago, you know, telegraphy was only invented in the 1860s. Yeah, Morse code, telegraph. Prior to that, the idea of being able to communicate instantly from London to China, I mean, it would take boats 4 months to go around. And in fact, what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? There was races when the crop came in China every year because the traders in London could make or lose fortunes depending upon who bought futures on the tea crop that year. And when the telegraph was invented, all of a sudden there was no time, there was no space. And of course now with the internet and with the visual, you know, when Maxwell kind of came up with the equations for how electromagnetic radiation propagates, you know, radio, television, all that kind of stuff, no one ever thought that there would be any way to package up reality somehow and then accelerate it at the speed of light. And then at the other end, boom, there you are from Hawaii sitting in my living room outside of, you know, of Seattle. And it was like, just like science fiction.
It's so great. Let's just realize for a minute, this is a really helpful way to see reality for all of us. We are living in a time travel machine, and the mind only has, I mean, why we love listening to Rick? Because he stretches our capacity. Most of us live in a very small space. And because of that, the limitation of, because Mr. Gemini rising, the curiosity of your chart, the 11th house with all those planets was like, I have to show my family here what your chart looks like. And Neptune opposite all of them. Can I just pull it up? Because for God's sake.
Yeah, it's on Astro Data Bank. It's in the public domain. I don't mind.
I'm right here. I've been waiting for this moment. By the way, my whole company this whole podcast is based on looking at people's charts. So you're in the family now. I'm so happy that we're getting to meet. Here we go. Here comes.
It's just another dysfunctional family I'm a part of.
That's the definite truth. And I love being this family. Okay, so notice the 4 planets. This is so astounding. We always look in the middle of the circle. Here's 11. There's all these planets in the house of the time traveler, the 11th, the astrologer, who has no bounds to being limited by a reality that's based on the past. And then we use Neptune as the mystical doorway to go, yeah, I'll second that. For God's sake, why are you holding on so tight? And
Debra, before you go on, what's the degree and minute of Venus and the degree and minute of Neptune?
13 and 13. That was so deliberate.
No, it's not just 13. It's 1344. Same degree, same minute.
I just love how he interrupts. Here's one of my questions. When I see that, because I notice that I'm a very degree person, when I see exact degrees, I have to say to myself, who made that chart of Rick Levine? How did that become so perfectly designed for you to be our time traveler and our mouthpiece to liberate us from the bondage and take Neptune on the freedom of Neptune to say, don't be so attached to this reality. And that is one of your gifts to us. I just want to thank you. It's a very specific human. I can't imagine what that was like for you growing up. Mr. Magical, mystical, didn't know how to hold on to this reality and had so much energy. What was that like?
I spent a lot of time outside in nature, a lot of time studying and music and playing, musical. I had the advantage of taking piano and violin and trombone, and so music is part of my life. And I also grew up in a community of, even though my family wasn't practitioners, I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish community, and so I sat for hours listening to people chanting in Hebrew, a 4,000-year-old hum, where I just basically had no idea what they were saying. I just zoned out. And so I got these mystical things that I didn't even know was mystical. It was just, magical mystery tour.
Your magical mystical tour. How did they interpret you? Like, were you accepted or were you kind of a strange duck? Let me
Yeah,
guess.
I got by. The Gemini rising. I read a lot. I kind of always knew something. I was clever. I had a lot of friends. I was in a lot of clubs and that kind of stuff. I mean, even it's like there's a part of my life that has always been Gemini rising bifurcated. I'm very comfortable doing mindless, dumb stuff, hanging out with people, just in surface land. In fact, when I was in college in my junior year, we had to write an essay on what we wanted to do when we grew up. And I wrote a paper that basically said, when I grow up, I want to be an nth dimensional spy in linear land. I swear. I mean, that was my goal in life.
You
Um,
just described your chart. Did you guys see that? 4 planets in the 11th house opposite Neptune with Gemini rising, the gift of the gab. And by the way, Neptune is the gift of seeing between worlds. I feel like you live in multiple dimensions. What did
and
you just
Neptune is also trine my ascendant.
So back to my question,
Yeah.
what is, because I can point to my chart, which we've never done, but I could really show you how deliberate. I had a woman come to see me last year. I hardly ever do readings, but I did one because she had my birthday the same year, a day off in Detroit where I was born. So I wanted to see what she was like, but she had moon in Pisces and my moon is the grand trine. It's my moon is everything in my chart. So I went to do this reading for, of course, I knew her chart really well, but quickly found out that she had no self-esteem. She knew she was a healer, but she'd given it away because her family wanted her to satisfy their Jewish culture. And it was so significant to me that the same chart with that same time of birth
Yeah.
was that slate moon. And how is it that life decided to give me that moon in Aries? And I ask you the same question.
Yeah.
How is it that you have 13 degrees? Is there any answer to that mystery?
No, no. I mean, ultimately, with all of my scientific background, and we could do an hour deep dive on the scientific reasons why astrology works, leaning on low frequency electromagnetic waves, quantum physics, non-locality. I mean, I know all the buzzwords, all the scientific background of why, with the advent of quantum physics, astrology is absolutely embraceable by the most current scientific thought. But when push comes to shove, I do know why astrology works. It's magic.
And
It's magic.
magic.
That's it. And so are we, and so are our charts, and
You
all
know,
the logic in the world doesn't
doesn't
change that.
So I'm deeply studying right now the Tarot, and in the Tarot, the first card is the Fool. It's Uranus. What a crazy person to even come onto this planet. What were we thinking? And then the very first stop is the Magician, who has 4 elements sitting on his table. And he says, if you're going to go through this movie, you're going to run through the evolutionary arc of the human condition. The magic, here's my take on it, is understanding the 4 elements. So that's a shout out to my whole audience. And I can see that your mastery has come by being able to liberate. This is what I want to come back to. As a kid, as a young being, you came in freer. Even though you were in an Orthodox Jewish upbringing, some part of your brain wasn't prepared. That's the 11th house with Neptune opposite your Mercury.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, my childhood I mean, I was very blessed because I had a lot of opportunity to be outside. I grew up, with a bicycle and free reign and a small town in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains, upstate New York. I grew up hunting and fishing and swimming and camping and all of that stuff. And I grew up with music and I grew up with a lot of books and the encouragement to read. And I was an avid reader. But at the same time, I was totally disenfranchised. I think the technical astrological term is fucked up. I'm, I mean, I was in a family that made no sense to me at all. I made no sense to them. And so my Cancer moon, which in some way is my saving grace of my chart, with 4 planets in Aries, the North Node also in Aries, with Gemini rising, with some planets in Leo, I'd be a real asshole, if I didn't have a Cancer moon that really makes me caring, kind, compassionate. I shouldn't say makes me, but but that also, I mean, the degrees again, my sun is 16 Aries, my moon is 16 Cancer. My
Wow.
my ascendant is 16 Gemini. So all those Aries planets are sextiling my ascendant, which means there's a facileness of that energy coming out. But meanwhile, I have a moon that no one sees. Well, everyone sees when they get to know me because I've learned to. I didn't know that moon existed in me as a kid growing up. I didn't know there was such a thing about as feelings. I mean, I read about them and I was curious about them, but no one,
But that's only water. It's just you've got one planet.
yeah, but no one in my family would ever say I feel this way. I mean, it was just it was like I feel that way. No, you don't. You feel that way. Just do. Okay.
I have a question. Now we're going to take a jump to the conversation of free will and destiny, because clearly your life and my life, it's very
Oh,
clear, and I hear about this all the time. Go ahead.
yeah.
I'm all.
Well, it's funny because about 7 or 8 years ago, I was invited to speak at a conference sponsored by the Krishnamurti Institute in Calcutta, India. And there were about 20 Western astrologers there. And it was a huge conference because this school had graduated something like 8,000 astrologers in the past 10 years. It's India, and the audience was mostly Indian, local Indian and or Vedic astrologers, and we each gave 20-minute talks or 25-minute talks. Didn't matter where you came from. It was like a TED conference where everyone had a 25-minute talk, and the talk that I gave was a quantum look at fate versus free will. And I, from that conference, was awarded the International Astrologer of the Year award. The Indians are very big on these, kind of overblown awards and whatever. But the point is that I've spent a lot of time with this question. And although the talk is online, it's on YouTube, it's on my YouTube channel. You could probably find it, the talk from that day. But in a paragraph, it's this. As quantum physicists delved into the subatomic realm, they discovered that light, and this is based upon Einstein's breakthroughs, that light, when it was measured, was actually a particle. Light was a particle, and Einstein called it a photon. A photon is a packet of light that is measurable as a particle. But when you're not looking at it, it's traveling like a wave, not as a particle, but actually as a wave. And this kind of was translated into the whole quantum physics realm as what Niels Bohr called complementarity, meaning it's the particle wave duality. Electromagnetic energy and all subatomic things travel, they propagate like waves, and that can be shown and proven. But when you measure it, for the moment you measure it, it becomes a particle. And when you stop measuring it, it goes back to being a wave. So here's the punchline to this. We know that light is a particle and a wave. What about planets? Are they particles or waves? Well, as astrologers for thousands of years, we've been mapping them in horoscopes as particles. They're big. Matter of fact, my students call the planets BFPs, big fucking particles. But they're still particles. When you look at Saturn, you see it as a lump, and you map it at 13 degrees of Pisces in a chart. It's a particle. But when you're not looking at Saturn, it's propagating like a wave at about 3 cycles every century. The moon, which is full in a day, is a particle. But when
How
you're
does
not
it relate
looking
to
at
free
it, it
will?
travels
Okay, you
like
are
a
the
wave.
best storyteller. Tell me how this relates to free will versus
It's
destiny.
very simple. Fate is to particle as free will is to wave. That's it. It's that simple. In other words, Heisenberg was awarded a Nobel Prize for his understanding, his mathematical understanding of complementarity. And what he proved was that at any given moment, the more you know about where a photon is going, the less you know about where it is. And the more you know about where it is, the less you know about where it is going.
Let's bring that home. Let's bring that home to the
Very
human.
simple. One sentence. At any given moment, the more you focus on particle, on fate, the less you know about and the less free will you have. The more you focus on free will, the less you have about fate and free will are complementary. They both always exist, but the brain, right brain, left brain, can only know particle or wave. And the more you know about one, the less you know about the other.
Translate this into Mercury and Taurus.
The more you know about fate, the less you know about free will at any given moment, and the opposite.
And here's my translation. I get it. And here's my translation. When I gave my life away and reduced my free will in the name of my service and said to spirit life, my mind is not big enough to make decisions. I really trust you. And I really sincerely mean that. And I did my meditation and I sincerely gave my free will away. Magic began. So there's something to be said about letting the heart, learning about really trusting, letting your mind, because you are such an interesting intellectual stimulus. And I love astrology, and all of us that study astrology have this fixation of being able to read and write and do all this, the numbers and the numbers and the numbers. And back at the ranch, where wisdom starts is when the mind is put into its place, as Einstein said, when it's a servant to the soul. And once that occurs, my free will button got taken into a very large position. And all it says is do what you're told.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, Deepak Chopra would call that, or Lynn McTaggart would call that, the field. It's the infinite potential that exists in the self-intelligent quantum field.
I did a reading for Deepak, and this was my question. I'll never forget this. He told me the story about this astrologer. You've probably heard this in India, where you do this long, long journey. You're walking up this mountain, and you get to this place where they open up this room, and on the shelves is parched paper.
The parchment, the leaves. Yeah.
And they pull out the leaves, and then they sit down. This is what he told me. And then he told me the story about his name, his children's name, the date of his birth, the date of his death. And
Crazy.
they knew everything. And then when he finished, I said, now, why am I here? Like, you got this. But the point of that story is I left there and thought, I know it was true. I'm asking, here we back are to free will and to destiny. How could they know?
Magic.
It's my favorite answer. Okay, we're back to the magician, the first card of the deck. I'm with you. I'm not going to let my mind, this is the magician's wisdom. My mind is, I'm a Gemini with Moon in Aries. I am insatiable. My mental constructs cannot stop reading, writing, and studying. And that's why I'm really falling in love with your mind. Can I tell the truth? My Venus in Gemini, woohoo, at 14 degrees, sitting right there on your ascendant. And at the same time, my maturity as an almost 70,000-year-old person is I've learned that my heart and wisdom come beyond my mind. And I want everyone to hear this because you're being stimulated. And astrology is that medicine. It's a medicine. I always say it's like getting Costco and getting that Windex and spraying it all over your left brain. Like, you clean off your left brain and you remember dates and numbers and you study the charts and you study the planets and you study the aspects and you study the progression and all that Windex. And back at the ranch on your right brain is, shh, let this touch your heart. Let astrology be the doorway that stimulates your faith. So I want to ask you again this question. The planet is, you've really helped me already. The planet's in this major change. My emotional body, being a good Jewish girl with Mars and Cancer, gets scared. My Mercury and Taurus. I'm like, uh-oh, the old formulas that used to work, the old codes don't look familiar to me. I'm also Uranus in the midheaven, 3 degrees, sextiling my sun, 3 degrees, Gemini, Leo, Gemini, perfect sextile. I love the weird and the wonderful. I'm all about getting outside this reality, but I coexist in two worlds. Unlike you, who are like a spaceship, I have one big fat foot on the ground barefoot. I really practice the maintenance of my human, which sometimes I get bored with me because I get so stimulated by you. And I'm like, Deborah, we're doing water, air, earth, and fire again. You got to be kidding me. So I repeated my same over almost 50 years I've been teaching. And my comfort comes when I see a person like you who is helping us bridge these two worlds to know there's nothing to be afraid of. I think
Well,
under
I think there are, yeah, it's interesting because fear is an interesting thing. I mean, because we get individual survival mixed up with collective survival. And there are things to be afraid of. I mean, but I think often fear is misplaced or is tied to some other event than what it is that's going on.
right, there's two facts. One is forget everything and run, and one is forgetting everything's all right. There's two
Yeah,
different with
yeah,
fear.
yeah.
And Pat Gregory really stimulated this, the 24th chromosome and this new invention of the new earth and the new heaven, that the new human is emerging in the presence of this transition with all the outer planets. There's a new template of the human condition. And what we'll think of as the future, will we get married? Will we have kids? Will we have all of the nature of the physical plane of our existence, according to the climate scientists? It's not going to look the same and be the same. So that lends itself to fear, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
At the same time, where is the comfort? And I feel like you're like the old man of the zodiac that we can sit with and go, are we okay? Are we going to be okay when we grow up? And your message I feel in you is this crazy enthusiast, this crazy optimism.
I'm not sure. I mean, look, from the long perspective, whether we're okay, meaning me, you, everyone who's listening, all humanity and everything on earth, whether we are okay or not, in the long haul, is the universe doesn't give a fuck. You know, it's like we are so minusculely, it's hubris to think that the entire evolution of the cosmos is dependent upon what we do here on planet Earth. Now that's not to say that my life, your life, our lives individually, our children's lives and their children. It's not to say that that's not important to us, because it certainly is. When you look at things like, oh, I hear people say, oh, that's so unnatural. I mean, I am an avid environmentalist, but there's a part of me that looks at the plastic island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which to my sensibility is horrific. And yet we don't know. We say it's so unnatural. Can't be unnatural. Is honey unnatural? It wasn't there until bees made it. Anything that humans create, if we are part of nature, is natural. Marshall McLuhan claimed that machines were actually a new phylum, that they were machinists, and that the human beings were the honeybees of the machine world, basically keeping that running. Now, I'm not saying or selling that as an idea. I'm just saying our perspective is so limited. We don't know that nature hasn't engineered us to create plastics so that we make that plastic island. I've been reading recently the amount of microplastics that are found in every human's brain on the planet right now. And we don't know that there's not a larger evolutionary trajectory going on that actually is about replacing carbon life with some sort of long chain polymer that will allow intelligent organic beings to live for thousands of years instead of 100 years. I don't know. You don't know. We don't know. But we look at that and go, that is horrible. And from my perspective, it is. But I'm just saying that I'm not an optimist, but I do believe that there are things from the past that we probably would be wise to try to hold on to. And yet, like Nietzsche wrote about in Zarathustra, Zarathustra, we're basically in between. This concept of transhumanism or posthumanism is real. And all the fighting in the world of the Luddites trying to destroy machines to prevent the Industrial Revolution did not prevent the Industrial Revolution, nor will we prevent the advent of artificial intelligence becoming more and more part of us. Now we can engineer how we integrate that and how we move into those realms. And that could be very important. And that inflection point may be a point that we're at right now. And that right now means this year, next year, next year. And what we do or don't do during this time certainly can have the impact of determining the way in which humanity moves forward for the next hundred or thousands of years. And so I think it's really important that people don't get discouraged, but instead understand that disillusionment is about the illusions meeting the three-dimensional reality, and then engaging it in whatever way they can, individually, personally, socially, culturally, whether it's donating money to causes that you believe in, whatever it is. But there's no right, wrong here. The right and wrong becomes the bifurcation of thinking that my way is the right way and your way is the wrong way. The only right way is for us to understand why people who are taking the wrong way have come to that path. And that works for whatever side of whatever issue you're on, because that is the only way we're going to get out of this mess.
That's exactly what astrology does, is the compassion of understanding those we don't understand. That's what its highest value. But this is the conversation. I'm being so stimulated that I keep forgetting my questions. This was a good question in light of what you just said. The AI is on its way. The plastics are in the body. They're all over. They're in the Antarctic. They're all over the whole planet. We judge that as something's wrong, and it feels that way to the human emotional body.
And it might be.
Life is going, life doesn't care. The earth is going to survive and life is doing her thing. And our objective, to our subjective emotional bodies have all kinds of opinions and feelings about all of this. I see what's really being invited in this conversation is, if the compassion that I have towards myself, having learned my chart, if I have compassion for you, knowing your chart, if I have compassion for the people that are being voted for who I don't get, but you can bet, I swear, I look at every single person. I'm like addicted to astrology. I have a serious addiction. It's okay. It's at the AA group. I'm Debra, and I'm addicted to astrology. Can you say that?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're in the same club.
Yeah.
And
except
then
I don't say I'm Debra.
And then my question is the compassionate note of the human, of your moon in Cancer and the people watching this. The exciting piece is your contribution, whether we survive or not is irrelevant, but your contribution of evolving the level of your awareness and being actively curious, which is what you and I both have that same thing in common, allows me to stay really interested. And that's the difference of the crispy critter, older people getting more and more conservative, wanting to hold us back and to make America great again, and the ones that say, hey, let's just be open to considering another version of the human condition. This is what I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I'd like to make humanity great, period.
Exactly. Let's make humanity great again. And was there
Not
ever
again, just for the first
Right.
time. Let's
Let's
just
make it
get it
that.
right,
And yes, in the Lemuria or in Atlantis or in different evolutions of our creation, were there times when the human condition displayed, demonstrated wisdom? And then did we go empire up, empire down? I mean, there's a natural evolution that goes up and down.
Yeah.
And it's hard to tolerate unless you're a Gemini, Aries, 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 Aries. So for you, change and excitement, but there's lots of people, and that's the grippers. So any of you that are feeling excited and or scared, pay attention to your own nature. Like, what do I need? I know personally, I have to have repetitive. I mean, the Taurus in me is slightly embarrassing. And knowing that about myself, knowing that has reduced it from being embarrassing to being stabilizing. You, on the other hand, have to be stimulated.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that there are a lot of people that are being either immediately hurt or threatened. There are a lot of people that our friends and family and relatives, I guess that's family, and neighbors and people that we know or know of, that are basically that are either already suffering or are going to be suffering more based upon our current, the United States' current governmental condition. But it's easy to forget, and this in no way minimizes what I just said. It's easy to forget that we in the United States have been living in somewhat of a bubble, and that there are people around the planet whether it's in Iraq or in Afghanistan or Sudan or Gaza or wherever it is on the planet, there have been people, you say, oh, this is apocalyptic. There are people who lived in Bhopal, India, who had their apocalypse 30 years ago, when half the town died from a, Union Carbide poisoning, from a plant there. The thing is that what's difficult is the extreme amount of disruption and change. And I'm not a fan of the way this is unfolding, but I am a fan of understanding that it couldn't continue the way it was, even though it felt like it was okay. Because what we're in is a larger trajectory where a few things are going to go away, or we will all go away. And the few things that are going away are colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, and patriarchy. And those are basic understandings of the pinnings. I mean, it's like if you had lived 300 years ago and someone told you that you could stand up to a monarch, who was divinely given the right to own the country, that was crazy. The American Revolution was crazy because no one had actually basically said, no, we're going to create a government without a monarch. Now, obviously, we've slipped. We had a bit of infantile regression, and we apparently have, elected a monarch. It's not about what his politics are or whether he's a good person or a bad person. We could have whole discussions on that. The fact of the matter is that this has happened. It's like the body doesn't become ill unless there's an opening for that illness. And we as a society have basically had this opening for this illness of which we need to take the cure. And we're either going to figure it out, or the virus, viruses are stupid. They will basically take over an organism until the organism dies, and then the virus dies. And there are many insecticide colonies that have the intelligence not to do that. You look at ant colonies or termite colonies or a beehive, and they survive. And this is actually, in some ways, this is the shadow of Pluto in Aquarius, or the Aquarius age that may be still 100 years away or so. But the point here is that whole idea of network, of interrelatability on equality. I mean, a termite colony is a perfect example of that, and that's frightening. And that's Borg in the Star Trek world, and that's frightening to us humans because it feels like we're going to lose our individuality. And in some ways, let me just finish this one sentence. In some ways, we have created an exonervous system with the internet, and we are, in fact, cells running around inside of a larger brain.
Like a simulation, do you believe in that we've been...
Languaging. I'm not sure. I don't know.
See, all that abstract stuff, I'm bringing us back. I don't care when the Aquarian age enters. I want you to distinguish for me the Piscean age to the Aquarian age. We know that people say,
yeah, simple. The Piscean age required a mystical connection between the opposites. You had the fish swimming in opposite directions connected by a golden thread. That's the symbol. The church, the Catholic Church, fish swimming in opposite directions, male, female, up, down, right, left, conservative, liberal, whatever the opposites are. And they seem to be going in opposite ways. And it took a priest to make that connection. You don't get to talk to God directly. You need to contact an intermediary, a mystic. Aquarius is the instantaneous resolution of all those, opposites that are totally opposite. And so you now have the vibration that holds everything together.
Okay, the opposite, the connection of the Aquarian age that we're sitting in versus the Piscean age that we left behind, and how the Aquarian age allows us to be in a Zoom room across the world in this non-physical experience, talking about astrology that we never could talk about in the past. Women were never allowed. I have a school that has graduated 7,000 students. And the 7,000 students have all been 98% women. And I know you've spoken to this. I didn't get to hear the full breadth of it, but that there was never an allowance for women to ever enter the back to work on the strategy of a war with the kings in the back room.
No, there was never an allowance for women to learn how to read and write, even.
There was never allowance for women to be a rabbi. Unacceptable.
Yeah.
The world has changed, you guys. This is the best news ever. Things are really different. And while it is one hand scary, on the other hand, what's going to happen next? Which brings us back to this next upcoming year. When I think about Pluto being in Aquarius, you've done a great job in the entrance of AI. And then I think about Uranus entering Gemini. I can't translate that one. Can you help me with that?
Oh, I think it's just more of a move into the intellectual, the technology. I think the danger of all these planets moving into fire and air is the outward movement. And we have to keep reminding ourselves, as you said earlier, that we have bodies. It's easy to go through, this externalization and into the excitement of all the technology and just become thoughts. And the fact that we do have bodies is really important, that the moon, for example, is part of our construct. I think that this is really important, and that's going to be one of the lessons or one of the areas in which we're going to have to consistently work on. It's easy to talk about these optimistic and uplifting things. And at the same time, we have to be aware that there are laws that are preventing, women from having any sort of control. There are people in government who want women to have no right to vote, especially childless women with cats. I mean, it's bizarre what's going on. And yet, at the same time, there's a larger trajectory that I think that in some ways, this is like a last hurrah. I've been quoting recently the lyrics from a Jackson Browne song that he wrote in, I think, 1971 or 72, called Before the Deluge. And the verse that I've been quoting goes like this. Some of them were angry at the way the earth was abused by the men who learned how to forge her beauty into power. And they struggled to protect her from them, only to be confused by the magnitude of their fury in the final hour. That's what we're experiencing right now. We're experiencing the last hurrah. But the thing is, we don't know whether that last hurrah will be strong enough to actually suppress everything, or whether it's just it's so transparent on some levels as to what's going on to those people who are paying attention. And then you look at other people out there and they think that what's going on is the best thing ever. And it may be, if only to bring all of this into such awareness that it activates us into doing something, but it may not be, and we don't know. And anyone who says they know doesn't.
It's such a beautiful mystery, and it always brings me back to have faith. The only thing I can do with that conversation, because I am really conscious that there's this big decision point. We're at this really radical, as we enter this next transition, the explosion of fire and air can destroy or create, and it will be based on the human condition. And at this moment, I don't have a lot of faith, to tell the honest truth, in the human condition. From what I've seen so far, to be perfectly honest, I'm a little more of a pessimist than you are, in that I've heard too many stories as a psychologist and really understood the underpinning of the human psyche to not be so trustworthy until the observer comes on. And we wake up inside the dream, and the people watching this, and there's this huge movement now in my imagination. Back to your point, I don't know if it's true or not, but it feels like a lot of people are waking up, and yes, there's going to be a split. And you guys watching this, that's why you're so important. Like the moment in your life right now of being able to identify that you're heralding in being a midwife. What else are we here to do except to exercise the practice of evolution? And I'll speak in first person, the evolution of my character from when I was young, a little Jewish girl in Detroit, to who I am now is unrecognizable. And I see the same with you. I didn't know. That was so fun to hear, because I was also in a very small Jewish community.
I end almost every one of my podcasts with think cosmically, act locally, not think globally, but think cosmically. In other words, pushing our thoughts out as far as we can, astrologically, that helps. But it's useless to do that unless we then act locally, meaning be compassionate, be kind, and actually spread the positive side of it, regardless of what's happening top down out there. Because as Carl Jung wrote in the last book he wrote before he died, a book called The Undiscovered Self, a lovely little, maybe 100-page, little novelette sized book, he wrote that world peace will never be gained by politicians and treaties. World peace will be gained by people in the world gaining peace within their psyches, because all war is basically a result of the projection of unresolved angst, fear, etc. And this as a concept is really not a whole lot different than Mahayana Buddhism, which in some ways is, I mean, it's been around for, a couple thousand years. And in some ways, the idea that no one can achieve real enlightenment until everyone does, because if there's anyone that is in pain or suffering or hurting, then because of quantum physics understanding of non-locality, it's like we can't be off. There's no such thing as just getting off the wheel. We're on the wheel. And so that's why we each need to do our part, whatever that might be. For some people, it's being in politics. For some people, it's donating money to causes. For some people, it's simply holding the door, for some elderly, woman or man who has an extra bag coming out of a supermarket. It's whatever we can do. Those things are contagious. And that's really what's going to create, or that is what is creating the revolution.
Okay, can I just finish with one thing? It's so interesting.
It's your show. You can do whatever you want.
I'm looking at your progress chart. Your sun at 29 degrees of Gemini and your progress moon at 1 degree of Taurus. I thought, oh my God, Rick, the whole chart's, you, not only is the world going to fire and air, you're going to earth and water. You're about to make a major transition. Have you felt that moon in Taurus just this last month asking you to slow down as you coughed your little head off?
uh, yeah, yeah.
Or are you slowing down, Mr. Aries?
Yeah. No, there's definitely a piece of the story there for sure.
Yeah, so I would really love to continue. I want to do this again if you're open to it. I feel like the level of chemistry, because of for me, the Aries Gemini, I'm so enthralled by the ability to time travel and then slow it down and just honor your bodies, what I'm asking to do, because I can see, it's been like, and there's something going around, obviously. This is such an echo chamber for what's going on in the planet. There's a call for all of us to pay attention to our bodies and to really respect and slow down and know that whatever happens in the long view, the moment is all we have. Time is absolute. I find it so interesting to find out that Saturn, my best friend, is also the believer that time, being limited, has freedom in the name of Neptune come this summer to liberate itself. And I feel like we're being asked to liberate without taking our hands off our body.
Mm-hmm.
It's a funny combo, isn't it?
Interesting combo. Yeah. And it's certainly part of the nature of these times. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to complete with? Is there anything you feel like just in the message of the transition from this era that we're about to enter 2025, anything you'd leave our audience with?
Think cosmically, act locally, be flexible and be firm. It's the open hand, and the iron fist at this, the same time is choose your battles wisely, because if you get fired up and discouraged about everything that happens, you'll fight every little battle and you may win a lot of battles and still lose the war. It's basically, don't disengage. This is not a time to just say, I can't do anything, I'm not going to pay attention. But it's also maybe not a time to try to change every little thing. But there's this wonderful website, fivecalls.org, I think it is, or fivecalls.net, fivecalls.org. Make phone calls. It's anything we do on any level right now is important. It's important to be heard, and it's important to be, engaged.
Said the Aries opposite Libra. I love that you're in the dialogue of Aries Libra, the warrior and the peacemaker, the warrior and the peacemaker. It's so prevalent to who you are. So thank you so much. And I want to say that listening to this twice and taking notes and really paying attention to the evolution of consciousness. We went across so much time, and all through time astrology has existed. I find that so shocking. that it passed the test of time as, and now finally it's getting validated, and so many people are now finally looking up. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Gives us a job, keeps us interested. So thank you all for being here. And
Thank you so much for listening. We want to keep this conversation going with you, so please subscribe to our podcast and leave a rating and review to make sure you never miss an episode. Remember, climate activist by day,
Thank you for
human by night. Send Debra a DM on Instagram at Debra Silverman Astrology and visit DebraSilvermanAstrology.com. And we're going to leave you like we leave every single episode. Make it your mission to change the world.